Right, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen, it's Antony Carpen here on St Andrew Street, Regent Street border, and if you just look at the other side of the camera, you can see that that's where the line is drawn. Now, if we move over this way, we've got the old police station, which is probably going to be turned into a hotel of some sort, and just beyond there, if you look above the Sainsbury's sign, you've got St Andrew Street Baptist Church, and if we move along here, you've got what is now Mandela House, but what was once, I believe, the first Tesco's in Cambridge. And although the buildings down this road actually look a lot older than they are, many of them are relatively modern. So if we look over to where the Novi bar is on the other side of the camera, just over there, you'll be able to see, although it looks old, that is circa 1930, and that used to be a hotel on that site before it burnt down in a fire. Now, this little bundle of fun down there is not with me, but he's behaving well. Now, behind me here used to be the driveway for the old Cambridge News Printworks before they first moved to Newmarket Road and then moved off to Milton. What we used to have here, where the Sainsbury's local now is, used to be the biggest theatre in Cambridge, certainly one of them, because if you look at the old photos you can see just how many seats you could get into this place next door. Unfortunately, the theatre was a victim of the rise of the television, and in the 1950s and 60s it lost a lot of custom, and it ended up basically, locals tell me, producing shows that you would probably not want to take your children to if you were, for example, a churchgoer. And after that, in the 1960s, it ran out of money and went bust. And so in the early 1960s, it was demolished. And the current set of offices that you now see there in its place have been there pretty much ever since. Now, during the late 1990s, I worked for one of the major banks in one of their offices here, and it was where they did a lot of their international currency exchanges. This was in the days before the euro, and I'd often have to pop in upstairs to that office. Hang on, we've got cars going, so I'll just let them go and turn. They had a couple of offices here. They've both since shut down as they ended up centralising their operations. Now, unfortunately for me, rather than being able to take the redundancy money as they were closing down, about 4 weeks previously I'd just given my notice to say I was off to go to university, so I missed out on a £3,500 redundancy payment in 1999 money. Painful. It was also around that time that a lot of the old building societies were being flogged off, and this was one of the things that led to the banking crisis that we have today. And because I was under 18, I didn't get the full set of shares for one of the banks I had an account with, and lo and behold, that was one of the building societies converted into a bank that then had to be bailed out by the taxpayers. So, make of that what you will. Anyway, as you can see, we're seeing the completion of the University Arms Hotel, really converting it back to what it was before the 1960s changes, which, amongst other things, were brought in at a time when this part of town was undergoing huge changes. Because I found out recently in the newspaper archives that there was a plan really for the whole of Regent Street to not just Regent Street, but also Hills Road as well, to demolish a whole host of Georgian and Victorian townhouses and build offices in their place. And as we walk down Park Terrace here, you can see just examples of the various buildings that got demolished and rebuilt. And I can't particularly say they're the nicest of buildings in the world. When you look at just that big wall of brickwork, it'd be interesting to see if anything's put in its place. But then also at the same time, I also say when I see some of the older photos, were that some of the buildings that were there before them anything to write home about before? To which I have to say, all too often the answer is no. Every so often though, you do come across one absolute gem of a building and you think, yeah, how the hell did they end up knocking that one down? One example being the old Wesleyan Methodist church on Hills Road, and it turns out it was demolished in 1973 because it was sold back to the original leaseholders, the original freeholders, or were bought out by Guardian Asset Management, who then demolished the whole thing and turned it into the bland office block that it is today. We've just walked past what I will always call the Hogshead, because that's what it always was before I ended up going to university. It's been through a couple of brand name changes, but is now, I think, the grain silo or something like that. Prince Regent has always been the Prince Regent for as long as I can remember. And on this corner, I'll just switch the camera the other side. Now this used to be a petrol station and a garage. Now this was also the area that got bombed in the Second World War, and it was where two of our ARP wardens died in what I can only term as the bombing of Parker's Piece during World War II. And I think 9 or 10 people died in that air raid, where over 50 munitions I think were dropped in this part of town, including on the old Perse School, which, as you can just get a glimpse of by the red-leafed tree, that's part of the original old building. And yes, it was there that got hit. The buildings that are now in its place were added post-war, and are now the home of Cambridge Assessment. Now, I've always said for quite some time, you look over, you get a sense of what I mean. You've got a fair amount of disused space there, and you can get a sense, as perhaps you've seen, or you may have seen in one of my previous video talks, that when Cambridge Assessment move out, as they're due to in the next few years, this for me would make a wonderful site for a brand new 2,000 plus capacity concert hall, which, as far as I'm concerned, Cambridge much needs. And we've also got evidence in a number of reports from the music business and local council sector that there is demand, certainly for a multi-purpose facility that would include conferencing as well as concerts. In the grand scheme of things, as we found out with the old theatre, just because somewhere is big and has got a huge capacity doesn't necessarily mean people are going to use it. Now, one of the other reasons for wandering down here on a day like this is also in the archives. In the past few days, I discovered that the attempts to redevelop Cambridge and this part of Hills Road as part of a wider redevelopment scheme, which also explains why the Wesleyan church just up the road got demolished, even though there were complaints from the Petersfield Residents Association about that.
Where do we go, Ange?
We're now on Harvey Road, which is the road where Florence Ada Keynes lived down, and John Maynard Keynes, the founding father of macroeconomics, was also born. And I don't think either of them, if they were around now, would recognise, certainly this part of town, number 7, which is almost next door to where they are, but I think this is number 7 Hills Road. That used to be the headquarters of South Cambridgeshire District Council before they moved out to Camborne. Number 9 Hills Road. And that was quite a controversial move. Still is in some parts. Not least because the place that they moved to is stuck out in the middle of nowhere. And ideally, when you're building a new council building, ideally you want it slap bang in the middle of the community that it serves, rather than an anonymous building at the back end of a business park that you can't really get to by public transport. But hey, I didn't plan the thing. One of these days I'm going to find out the people who did and probably name them and shame them. This is another example, Terrington House, of a building that's now on the site of probably what was once another Victorian townhouse. We're going to be wandering up further as we go past the wonderful St Paul's Centre, St Paul's Church, and what we have here, and I'm just going to, as long as my battery allows, do a quick aside, as I did on our previous video, and just show you this tablet here, because it's easy to walk past it. But as you can see, these are the people who the parish mentions, and there is Lucy Gent. Now, Lucy was one of the ARP wardens that I mentioned, and you've also got Petica Robertson as well there. Now, I'd love to know more about the pair of them, because both Lucy and Petica were ARP wardens who, when the Luftwaffe came calling in World War II, basically worked their socks off to get locals into the air raid shelters as fast as they possibly could. And unfortunately, they were killed in action in the process. And I think they are, as far as I'm aware, and I want to check this, the only casualties in World War II who were women who died in action during the bombing of Cambridge. In total, just over 30 people died and just over 70 were injured, going by the records in the Cambridgeshire County Archives. And it was a privilege to go through the official war logbook, which detailed every single attack on the city, counting the total number of munitions estimated dropped. It was around 1,600, which is an astonishing figure. Now this is the site of the old Wesleyan church. Now, as you can see, it's quite bland. And next door to it was a pub called the House of Commons, funnily enough. And both of those, as I said, were demolished to make way for those two sets of offices. And again, all the way down from Stratton Parker, really all the way down to the Flying Pig pub just over the junction to Station Road. You've got a huge amount of post-war redevelopment, because over here we've got another office block, and this one again is another Cambridge assessment number, 72 Hills Road, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to this place when they move on. That again was just a row of houses, in the same way that Bateman House here also was a set of houses, and then the office next to it is where Apple have set up store. We also have another set of houses newly or relatively newly built at the time. They're actually the high-set houses, I think they are, and they are listed buildings, funnily enough, because they were quite revolutionary for their time. Now, the bit that I'm in here, and I'm not going to impede on people's privacy too much, because this is round the back of the lovely, if I can call it, curved crescent of properties around Station Road, and this gives you an idea of what some of the properties around the area before the redevelopment in the post-war era were like. And one of the buildings that was proposed that didn't actually get planning permission was, it's a very topical point as well, what would have been Cambridge's first real block of flats, over 10 stories high, and like I said, it never got built. Not entirely sure of the history behind it not being built, but it certainly ain't there. Now, what we have here, if you look behind me, you've got the War Memorial, which has been moved back, and behind it the Botanic Gardens. This is the new Mills and Reeve office block, and what you've got over the other side, there's the Flying Pig pub in blue, and next to it used to be a pub called the Osborne Arms. And back in the mid-1990s, the Osborne Arms was a pub where you would go to if you were about 16 and wanted to get served, because they served children there. And in those days, at secondary school, it was known as one of the pubs that would serve children. It doesn't exist now, it's been knocked down. And next to that used to be the old bus station. So what we now have, and this is where I'm going to end off here, if you look behind me there, you can see the huge, well, it's not really huge, but it's Kett House. And Kett House used to be the place where Ratty and Kett, the famous city builders, used to be, and they had some lovely, a lovely set of headquarters. If you look at the photo here, you'll see what I mean, because in comparison, there's quite a bland block in its place, and you can see behind me one of the townhouses, which again date from the Georgian Victorian era, which are now used mainly for language schools and private education colleges, mainly aimed at the international market or aimed at the resit market. But if you can imagine the whole of Station Road being made up of properties that look like that. And I'll leave it there.